I had to memorize the book from start to finish, the history of religions. In a way, I'm an expert in the history of religions. Later on, it turned out to be so useful to me. Apparently, in order to understand Islam, I needed to know the absurdities of other religions. That's what I learned. Because, like how a fish doesn't realize it's living in water. We have no idea that we belong to a religion that is built upon reason and logic, that is so well established, because we don't know the absurdities of other religions. All religions are based on that main religion. So it seems like something normal. This guy believes in it too. We think being Jewish is something normal as well. We don't know what kind of nonsense goes on there. Just think, in Christianity, there is God, and then there is the Son of God. He also possesses divine attributes. Jesus, peace be upon him, is one of them. All right, so he comes to this world. He sacrifices himself for people. He comes, but I don't get it. There are 4 rules of logic. There are principles. The principles of identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, and sufficient reason. Logic involves certain reasoning processes. Now, I see that according to the principle of identity, something cannot be something else while being itself. A is A. When we turn it into symbols in classical logic, in this case, if you ask who created time and space, it is God. But if the one you call God, Jesus, peace be upon him, is someone who created time and space, how is it that he comes into the world within time and space? There is a structure here that completely contradicts itself and does not conform to any rule of logic. But the person accepts this. There is no such thing in Islam. Come to Judaism, it's even worse. Just look at the Qumran texts. The Qumran texts have been translated into Turkish. There is a published version in Turkish. Look, it says exactly, Isaac wrestled with a man and Isaac defeated the man. The man said, you have defeated God. He thrown to the ground and dislocated his knee. Prophet Isaac didn't know he wrestled with and defeated God. This is a mindset that believes in such a God and considers believing in such a God as a religion. I didn't know any of this. Fine, I was half convinced. Christianity is nonsense, Judaism is nonsense, but I had no idea what exactly was nonsense. Just like when I say my Quran is a miracle, and someone asks, is the Quran really a miracle? Of course it's a miracle. Show me, what is it? All I ever heard was that it was a miracle, that's it. Exactly like this. So if we bring these issues to the topic I want to discuss because of our weakness regarding religion, there are so many scientific concepts in Islam that have completely disappeared from our world. One day I asked our assistant, I said, if we roll the dice 1,000 times, could we get 6s every time? He thought about it for a moment. It didn't make sense to him either. It'll come up 6, roll it 1,000 times. And every time is going to be 6. He said, well, it's a very slim chance, but I guess it could happen. I said, exactly. This guy wasn't always this limited in his thinking. I wondered why he turned out like this. Then, of course, I realized, then when you look at those concepts, for example, in Islam, in Islamic literature, there is something called impossible. There is a word. See how the absence of a single word removes the idea from your mind. How does the lack of a word conceal the truth? Something like 2 + 2 = 4 is necessary. In logic, this is called necessary wasip. This is the classic term, let's say it in our old language. This is called necessary wasip. 2 + 2 = 4. The whole is greater than its part. Something can both exist and not exist. It's equal. This is called necessary wasip. The opposite is impossible. The opposite would be a contradiction. Now there is the exact opposite of this. In other words, it must be necessary. And then there is what must not be. It is impossible. What is that? That is called impossible, mumtini. So what is impossible? Mumtini, 2 × 2 is 5. The whole is less than its part. Something can both exist and not exist at the same time. This is impossible. What does this mean? It can never happen. There isn't much trouble with these. Everyone can understand these. In other words, people's minds don't really get much doubt about these topics. But there is a third concept. That is the concept of possible mumkin. It falls within the realm of possibility. What does that mean? It may or may not happen. It can't be the opposite of necessary wasip or impossible mumtini either. It has to be necessary. It has to not be impossible. There isn't much difficulty in understanding this either. But there is a third concept, undoubtedly. This is what muhal means. It is possible, but only if there is a cause. So is there another word that is related to possible and comes under it? There is. What is it? Likely. For example, if you flip a coin 2 or 3 times, is it possible for it to land on heads? It is probable. That is the technical term for it. If you flip a coin twice, will it land heads? It will. What is this? Probable. But if you flip it 1,000 times, it won't always land on heads. If you roll a die 1,000 times, it won't always come up 6. For it to come up 6 every time, there would have to be cheating. Or there would have to be some reason, some cause. So muhal is a word that means something that, although possible, cannot happen without a cause. If there is no cause, it cannot occur. In other words, if you roll a die 1,000 times and it comes up 6 every time, there must be a reason for that. Otherwise, it can't happen. But if something happens without a reason, that's possible. That's called probable. In other words, if you throw the dice twice, you get 6s. If you throw them 3 times, 4 times, or several times, you get heads. These things can happen. They're probable. But if you roll it 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 100,000 times, or even 1,000,000,000 times, that's impossible. It will never happen. This is called muhal. What does that mean? For it to exist, it would require intervention within the realm of possibility. Even if you intervene in the nature of the impossible or the necessary, you can't change the outcome. 2 × 2 is 4. Even if all people come together and try to make 2 × 2 = 5, or roll the dice to make it 5, it won't happen. Or for example, the whole is smaller than its part, you can't do that, not even as a human. Such a thing can't happen. But it can be possible. However, this possibility is divided into 2. It can be without a cause, or it can be impossible without a cause, which is called impossible. When you say that nothing, not even a single letter, can exist without a scribe, if there is a cause, it can exist. If the letter has no cause, it is as impossible as the impossible itself. Let's say the concept of impossible doesn't exist in your mind. As Wittgenstein said, the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. I don't have the concept of impossible impossible in my mind. If you don't have the concept of impossible, you would accept evolution as sheep without question. Because evolution is a theory of locality. What does that mean? Atoms came together somehow. I mean, there are an infinite number of galaxies. And in just one of those galaxies, things happen to work out. That's all. So what? What's the big deal? I really wonder about this. If someone were to come across a single computer on a planet, in a galaxy, on a planet, if they found a computer, how many people would actually consider it possible that this computer came into existence on its own? Or if we consider how many parallel universes would be needed for a computer to exist on its own, to be random, or for things to happen through the movement and transformation of atoms in the universe, no one can really believe that's possible. Why? Because something purposeful cannot happen without consciousness. Pay close attention to this. For example, I mentioned this in those videos as well. One of these is a very obvious, clear rule, so much so that it's not even a topic of debate in logic since ancient times. It's not something that's dwelled on much. What is it? The absence of something cannot be proven. I see that he objects to this as well. How does he object? For example, if you object, we say that universal negatives are invalid in inductive reasoning. The absence of something cannot be proven. In other words, saying that universal negatives are invalid means, bring me, through induction, a single piece of evidence that proves an absence. There isn't any universally, but he objects to that as well. The second objection, and I mentioned this especially to introduce our main topic, the issue of evolution. There is an important issue. And what is that? The issue of purpose. The concept of purpose is what annoys atheism the most. It is, so to speak, atheism's guillotine, the sword that falls on its neck. Because if there is purpose, there is consciousness. If there is consciousness, there is no coincidence. That's why the thing atheism tries to avoid the most, the thing it tries hardest to eliminate, is the idea of purpose, claiming it has nothing to do with anything and so on. They say the eye is not for seeing, the ear is not for hearing, the liver is not there because it's needed as a liver. These things happen randomly. In other words, through some kind of mutation history to adapt to the environment. They have to somehow argue that all this happened without the existence of any consciousness. So you said there are cameras in front of me, 3 cameras. Have you ever heard of these cameras being invented by a blind person? Everyone knows that's impossible. Why? Because to make a camera, you need to understand light. You have to know how light behaves. You have to know that light refracts, that when light passes from one medium to a denser medium, it follows certain rules about refraction. If you don't know that light refracts in a denser medium, you can't make a camera. If you don't know what a darkroom is, if you don't know that light refracts and inverts when it passes through a small hole or lens, if you don't realize that when there's too much light, you need to block it with a shutter, then you can't make a camera. The same rules that apply to a camera apply exactly the same way inside the eye. In the same way, when it's done, they say, okay, we understand the camera, but this happened through evolution. What is evolution? Let me give you the source again. Look, I mentioned it in the videos. Why does evolution exist? Why was it proposed? Anyone can say anything, but there's also a philosophical origin to this. Open Alfred Weber's History of Philosophy book and look at the Darwin section. Look, it says exactly this there. Why is there something called the theory of evolution, by the way? It's not a theory, it's a hypothesis, isn't that right? Its precise name is hypothesis, which basically means a conjecture. It means for now, we haven't found anything, we can't figure it out. We can't stand behind it, but just go along with it. That's what hypothesis means. Now, it says exactly this there. Look, why was evolution put forward? Look at its philosophical foundation. It says exactly this to the theists. How can the apparent purposiveness, purpose, and teleological conscious cause seen in living beings, which has given a great advantage to those who believe in God, be explained, without invoking a purposeful conscious cause? Look, within the history of philosophy, it explains where the starting point of the issue of evolution lies, what that point is, and the reason why it emerged. How can the teleology observed in living things, which has given theists a major advantage, be explained by purposeless causes? Then it starts with my grandmother's tale. It says, for example, there is cosmic mud. What do they call it? There is cosmic mud and the cosmic environment.
Primordial soup.
Well, anyway.
Primitive soup.
After all, there's no limit to the tale, right? So it exists there. The necessary things came together. The necessary things came together. Out of infinite possibilities, just one happened to work out. And in practice, in reality, he expresses ideas that contradict what we see with the word impossible. He speaks from within the meaning of the word impossible. But I don't know the opposition. What is impossible? It is that which cannot happen without a cause, even though it is possible. If the concept that means possible, but only if it has a cause, which is called impossible, is not understood, and someone who has labeled himself as a scientist says this, then you have no chance to object. Because in order to object, you need to know the concepts. This issue of impossible, the concept of impossible, is actually one of the simplest among these concepts. People think with concepts. People think with concepts. If the concepts are not clear, I will have a discussion with my dear Qasim. I will address an issue, I will debate it. If we have not mutually agreed on the fundamental concepts of the issue we are debating, it is impossible for us to understand anything about this topic. If a topic is going to be discussed, let's say now that I'm going to teach an electronics class, I'm going to teach an electronics class. What do I need to explain first? I will explain the electron. I will explain the movement of the electron in a vacuum. What is frequency? I'll explain. I need to explain all of these. Have I explained these? Now I can start with electronics. Because in order to understand, you need to know the fundamental concepts that are prerequisites for understanding. And our biggest problem when talking to atheists is that they have almost no concepts in their minds. There are concepts that simply do not exist. Not only are there no concepts, but the concepts that do exist are also incorrect. One day, I was on my way to Hasatepe. At that time, I was in my final year in the philosophy department back in the day. Someone sat next to me, we started talking and so on. He was telling me about Islam and all that, but he kept explaining and explaining. I asked, where did you learn all this? It's all related to Islam. Well, that's what I learned from you. My friend, everything you just told me about Islam is completely wrong. How did you learn about Islam? There is such a mindset, such a psychology that he hasn't actually learned about Islam. He hasn't done any research on Islam, but he also thinks there's no need to. Why? Because after all, it's just another religion like Christianity or Judaism. My friend, Islam is different from the 4,000 religions in the world. It is not like the other religions. Its claim is based on reason, logic, and the workings of the universe. This is not the case with the other. Look up the Christian philosopher Tertullian on the internet. He says, I believe because it is absurd. Why does he say this? He says, if you call this a book, I believe it. But if you call it a phone, he says that's not a matter of faith, it's a matter of knowledge. This is what the man understands by faith. In Islam, however, the unseen الَّذِي نَمُ بِالْغَيْبِ refers to those who do not doubt the unseen, who do not deny it. On the other side, it says, إِفَالَةٍ زُورٍ, don't you see? Here, the word ghaib in the Quran means that which is perceived by reason. There is a verse, isn't there, in Surah An-Naml, one that everyone knows. You see the mountains as if they are firmly fixed in place. Yet in reality, they are passing by like clouds. This is how the verse goes. Let me repeat the sentence. The verse says, you see the mountains as if they are firmly fixed in place. Yet in reality, they are passing by like clouds. Exactly this sentence. So it says, you see, what does it mean? You see, all your five senses tell you that the mountain is standing still. But in reality, what is the truth? Logically know that in fact that mountain is moving like the clouds. What clouds know we know, right? Right now, look, I am sitting here without moving. Yes, that's what my eyes tell me. I'm not moving. The Quran says, you think you are motionless, but you're actually moving like the clouds, like a storm. I only understand that now. I am just now realizing that the earth is moving. This, for example, is called the concept of reality and truth. The world you see with your senses is reality. The world you perceive with your mind is the truth. It is a reality that the sun revolves, but it is the truth that the earth revolves. It is a reality that I'm standing still. But the truth is that I am actually moving like a storm. All these concepts are discussed. Now, if these concepts are not understood, what your eyes see is called reality. What your mind perceives is called truth. If we do not understand this concept, how can I comprehend what is said in Surah An-Naml, where it clearly states that you see the mountains as fixed, but in reality they are moving? I cannot understand it. In the Islamic world, in terms of words and concepts, and in the Quran as well, the literature is very extensive. But as it happens, we are deprived of these. Because we are deprived, we cannot even feel the lack. I have never seen anyone talk so much about Islam without ever having researched it. They neither research nor look into it. They don't feel the need, and yet they don't criticize either. You will encounter this often. You will see it. You have surely come across it. I know this because I have experienced it many times myself. He talked and talked, and I listened all the way to the end. Then I said, let me tell you about Islam. Everything you just explained is completely wrong. First of all, in order to understand that issue, it's important to pay attention to the concept of impossible. Secondly, look, I'm talking about an important matter, and that is this. Now, the claim of evolution is not like the matter of rolling a die 1,000 times. How many things are there? Is it 3,200,000,000 characters?
3.2 billion.
Calculate mathematically the probability of a book made up of 3.2 billion characters. A software, a book consisting of 3.2 billion letters, coming into existence on its own. I gave this example so the issue could be understood. There's one more point that needs to be understood here. Look, now let's say, for example, I claim that I rolled the die 1,000 times in a row and got 6 every single time. If I make such a claim, there's a point I'm confusing here. Pay attention to this. I'm emphasizing it. And that is this. Normally, this is a fundamental principle in both mathematics and statistics. If a die has 6 faces, each face has an equal chance of coming up. Is that correct? If you claim that you rolled a 6 1,000 times in a row, then you have to explain why the other 5 faces didn't come up. This is the point being emphasized here. Pay attention. Look, to claim that the code made up of 3,200,000,000 letters could come into existence on its own, and to express this with numbers like 600, 700, 1,000, or even 2 billion is misleading. To say, well, here's a number, so this could also happen, is to misunderstand the issue. Why? If these 3,200,000,000 characters can come into existence on their own, then since the probability of this not happening is thousands of times greater, you need to prove why the others do not. Because, for example, a die has 6 sides. In coin toss, there are 2 sides. The probability of being male or female is equal. It's like tossing a coin. There are 8 billion people. 8 billion coin tosses have been made. Half are women, half are men. Why? Because the probability of each side coming up is equal. Therefore, if there are 6 sides, as you keep tossing these numbers, look at the actual situation, the reality in practice. In practice, since the chance of each of the 6 sides coming up is equal, as the number of tosses increases, the 1/6 ratio becomes established. This is something to pay attention to. 107 elements. Among these, if there is carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and a cell, and if there are thousands or even hundreds of thousands of possible combinations they can form, since each possibility has an equal chance of occurring, life has only emerged through one specific arrangement of these. If you claim that this happened by itself, then you have to prove why. Out of the infinite other possibilities that had the same chance, none of them occur. Clear. Pay attention.